Some time ago, I landed a job at a small hospital just outside the town, a place that held special significance for me as it was where I had completed my training. The excitement of securing my first job post-graduation was undeniable, even if it was just casual work. The pay was excellent, and the familiarity of the environment made it all the more thrilling. My shifts typically spanned 12 hours, starting from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but occasionally, I had to cover the late shift from 3 to 11 p.m., a time slot I never particularly enjoyed, mainly because of the long drive home in the dark. Our small team consisted of just 4 nurses, an administrator, the emergency doctor, and myself. The hospital's size meant that we encountered a variety of unusual cases, some so severe that an emergency helicopter would be called in. I'd witnessed tragic events, including entire families lost to accidents on the winding country roads, and even had people bring in injured animals out of desperation when no nearby veterinarians were available. One night, around 10 p.m., I was lazily chatting with one of the nurses about a patient's chart, just passing the time until my shift ended at 11. The hospital was eerily quiet, with only 6 patients checked in so far. Suddenly, a strange noise came from the entrance, drawing my attention. A man was approaching, and though he appeared ordinary at first glance, his long coat seemed out of place for the sweltering summer night. The nurse beside me sighed heavily before heading off to the restroom, leaving me to handle our new arrival alone. As the man got closer, the peculiar noise grew louder, and I noticed something metallic catching the light, scraping along the floor as he dragged it behind him. A chill ran through me, but I couldn't quite see what it was. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and his face was ghostly pale, the kind of look that screamed exhaustion and perhaps something more sinister. I'd seen that expression before, usually in those under the influence of some substance. He leaned on the desk, anxiously running his fingers through his hair, pulling at it, while grinding his teeth. This kind of behavior typically signaled someone seeking drugs, often fabricating ailments like migraines or fibromyalgia, conditions difficult to disprove. I processed him as usual, though his irritability was becoming more evident. When I directed him to the waiting area, he demanded to know how long it would be. I estimated about 30 minutes since the on-call doctor was on a quick break, but this answer ignited a visible rage in him as he stormed off toward the waiting area, a room situated between the ER and the front desk. As he turned away, I caught a glimpse of what he had been dragging behind him, a large axe. Panic set in, but I kept my composure, resisting the urge to call a code over the PA system, not wanting to alert him. Instead, I discreetly dialed the police on my cell phone and rushed down the hall to alert the nurses. The nearest police station was 2 towns over, so it would take them about 20 minutes to arrive. Being a group of petite women, none of us dared approach him. He was a towering, muscular figure, and we knew we wouldn't stand a chance against him. I returned to the front desk and paged the doctor, asking him to call me, but there was no response. Meanwhile, the man's agitation was escalating, and soon he began shouting for help. I quickly took cover, while the other nurses and I devised a plan to trap him in the waiting area. The glass was reinforced, and the doors were sturdy enough to contain him until the police arrived. At least, that was the hope. The plan worked initially, but once he realized what we had done, he went into a frenzy, screaming and hurling chairs around the room. Then, he began hacking at the door with his axe, and we watched in horror as he started to make progress. Just then, the emergency doctor returned from his break, casually strolling through the front entrance with a drink in hand. Seeing us huddled by the front desk, he immediately took charge. After gathering the necessary information, he disappeared toward the back entrance used by EMTs. Moments later, he reappeared, unlocking one of the waiting room doors and, in a swift move, tackled the man from behind. He expertly restrained the man's wrists with cable ties and kept him pinned until the police finally arrived. That night, I couldn't have been more grateful for our young, fit doctor. As a token of my appreciation, I bought him coffee whenever our shifts overlapped, though I knew it could never fully express my gratitude. After this second terrifying incident during a late shift, I made the decision to avoid them altogether. Now, I stick to a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 schedule, where I feel much safer. Last August, I found myself back in the psychiatric ward of the local hospital, voluntarily admitting myself due to severe anxiety and depression. It was my second time there, but this stay came with an added layer of discomfort. I would be sharing a room with someone. For reasons unknown, the architects of the psychiatric unit decided on double rooms, so it was common for higher-functioning patients to be paired up. When I arrived, the nurses recognized me from my previous stay, which had been only about a month earlier. Typically, patients stayed in the ward for 1 to 2 weeks, and since this was a voluntary unit, it was usually free of actively psychotic or violent individuals. My roommate, Jane, appeared to be a quiet and harmless woman, petite and unassuming. Her main activity seemed to be sitting at her desk, endlessly working on crossword puzzles. That's all she ever did in the room. Each patient was given a desk and a dresser, placed right next to each other. I was admitted around 6 p.m., and by 9:30, I had taken my medication and was trying to wind down with some meditation before bed. As I focused on a serene picture of a tree and fence on the wall, something caught my eye, writing etched into the picture. I hadn't noticed it before. The words, faintly carved in pencil, read, "They are all liars, liars." There were other scribbles too, but I couldn't make them out. The discovery sent a shiver down my spine, but I assumed it was the work of a previous patient, so I reported it to the nurses. If you've ever been in a psychiatric ward, you know how monotonous it can be. Most days, I wandered the unit, circling it so many times that some patients claimed 30 laps equaled a mile. I also spent time in the art room, painting with a group. Jane, however, never joined any of the activities. In fact, she never left the room at all. It was only later that I realized she never even moved from her desk. Every time I returned to our room, there she was, still at her crossword puzzle. I assumed this was how she coped with the boredom, but then I noticed something unsettling. The puzzle never changed. It was always the same one, with no progress made, like a scene straight out of The Shining, where Mrs. Torrance discovers Jack's obsessive typing. It was a disturbing sign that something wasn't right. On the second night, I came back around 10:30 p.m. to find Jane still at her desk, the same crossword puzzle in front of her, the lights still on. By this point, she had stopped acknowledging my greetings or questions about joining the group. I shrugged it off, thinking she might be experiencing side effects from medication or just didn't feel like talking. I turned off my lights, pulled the privacy curtain, and quickly fell asleep, thanks to the strong medication I was on. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a medical assistant asking Jane if she thought it was time to go to bed or at least turn off her light so that I could sleep. Jane didn't respond and left the light on. I just rolled over and went back to sleep. At some point, she must have turned off the light because I woke up later in complete darkness. But something felt off. I wasn't sure if I was truly awake. Then I noticed someone standing just beyond my privacy curtain, near my bed. The curtain was slightly open, but all I could make out was a faint outline of a small figure. Panic set in, and I quickly switched on the lamp next to me. No one was there. I convinced myself it was just a bad dream and turned the light back off. The next morning, Jane was back at her desk, absorbed in her crossword puzzle. I left to get breakfast and check in with the psychiatrist. While waiting, one of the nurses approached me and mentioned that she was helping out with administering medications that day, something I hadn't encountered before. It was a kind gesture, given how understaffed they often were. While we waited, she whispered to me that my roommate had schizophrenia, and the reason she never left the room was because she was actively hallucinating. This revelation connected all the dots for me. There was no way I could stay in that room any longer. I requested a different room, and since this was a voluntary unit, I had the option to leave if they didn't accommodate me. After pleading for about an hour, they found me a room in the back. I quickly packed my things and moved. As I walked away, I glanced back and saw Jane watching me through the crack in the door as it slowly closed. Even now, thinking about it sends chills down my spine. On my last night there, one of the medical assistants pulled me aside to thank me. They explained that on the morning I was transferred, Jane had a severe breakdown. She was found clutching a pencil, threatening the staff with it. She eventually calmed down, but it served as a reminder that they needed to be more careful about pairing patients together. When I was 16, I had to undergo surgery for a heart condition that landed me in the hospital. I'm not sure if it was the medications they administered, but one night I was jolted awake by an unusual sensation in my legs. They were icy cold and tingling. Initially, I thought it was just some mild numbness and tried to dismiss it, but it only grew worse. Soon, I realized that the sensation had crept up to my thighs, and it became excruciatingly painful. Panic set in, and I frantically pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, I explained what was happening, and she immediately began examining me. By this time, the numbness had spread to my hips, and I struggled to move my legs. She quickly called for another nurse, and they both started checking the machines around me. Before long, they summoned the doctor. The pain and numbness continued to rise, eventually reaching my chest. I was overwhelmed with fear, convinced that I was about to die because I couldn't breathe properly, and everything around me was fading into darkness. The doctor was shouting at the nurses to get more help, but at some point, I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a different room with my parents by my side. The doctor explained that I had suffered a severe reaction to one of the drugs they had given me, which caused a temporary shutdown of my nervous system. He said I was incredibly fortunate that they had caught it in time, and I would need to remain in the hospital longer for observation. The rest of my stay was filled with dread, constantly fearing that the nightmare would repeat itself. Even now, the thought of taking new medications fills me with anxiety, as I can't shake the fear of experiencing that terrifying reaction again.